So hello everyone, good morning. This is Anil from IDSA here, and I'm excited to welcome you all to our webinar on semantic interoperability. And this session is powered by many projects, as you can see in the slide, and we know that all these projects are home for in-depth discussions about semantic interoperability and as well as advancement in the field. And today's session will be led by Wouter van den Berg, consultant from TNO, and who is an expert in semantic interoperability and also a very valuable contributor to the vocabulary hub workshops from IDSA. And so we encourage all attendees to actively participate in the discussion, ask questions, and share your perspectives. And Wouter, great to have you here, and I would like to get started.
Thank you, Anil, for your welcome. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for this opportunity. Yes, today we'll explore during this tech talk the topic of semantic interoperability and successful data sharing and the importance of achieving common understanding for successful data sharing. The main question that my talk revolves around is how do we get data space participants to use a common language? Well, since this is a tech talk, we can call this goal by its technical term semantic interoperability. Exploring this question, I'll address the three topics in this order, as shown here: why semantic interoperability is important, the role of vocabularies in IDS and the IDS architecture, and the purpose of the IDS Vocabulary Hub. And we will finish with a Q&A session. And if there is time, there might be some room for a quick demonstration on some tooling. But before we begin, maybe an introduction is in order. My name is Wouter van den Berg. I work at TNO, which is a Dutch independent research and technology organization. And the team that I am part of has been focusing for years on facilitating semantic interoperability in numerous Dutch economic sectors. And as a result of our activities, we have also developed in-house software we call Semantic Treehouse, specifically designed for vocabulary providers, to support open standardization, semantic standardization activities. And we've been doing and developing this for more than 5 years now, and it will become soon open source. The timing of this talk makes sense looking at recent developments. Like Anil mentioned, we have been part and active in an IDS Vocabulary Hub working group. Recently, 2 results have come out of that. One is the numerous additions to the IDS REM, mostly, of course, about semantic interoperability, vocabularies, and the Vocabulary Hub. And a new IDS white paper will be published soon, if it is not already, on covering these subjects. So for people watching a recording, there will be likely a link below. This is, of course, a collaborative effort. So please, if you're interested, have some questions or something to say, if you want to join forces, please contact IDSA to receive any information or invitations on the coming working group sessions, or in general collaborate with IDSA and partners on bringing the IDS REM, the Reference Architecture Model, further. Let's start. Why semantic interoperability is important? It's funny. It's a funny word because my mouth stops working half of the time when I want to say this word, so not very operable. But let's first back up. Why was this important? In fact, it's not just important, it's a major focus of the IDS approach, but not the only one, of course. We are zooming in on the interoperability aspect of data spaces, because without interoperability, simply put, nothing works. In particular, semantic interoperability, we mean by that the ability of IT systems to exchange data with unambiguous, shared, so clear meaning of data. And it's achieved using common information models, semantic models, or in other words, common vocabularies. This picture here from the IDS Communication Guide shows everything you need technically speaking to share data in IDS. On a high level of abstraction, of course, but most of it is in there. You see the identity providing part, which of course has to do with trust. There's the policy engine to enforce users' policies on data. There's of course the cataloging. We see contract negotiation, metadata broker for the findability of different data resources. The offer going from one participant to the next. And of course, below the actual data transfer. But my question from a semantic perspective is data sharing successful, or is it? Because nothing in this picture shows the semantic interoperability or the mechanisms for achieving that. And if you don't, then you can get into trouble. Clarity about the meaning of data is essential to ensure that the data can be accurately and consistently be interpreted and used by different people and systems. So when the meaning of data or shared data is unclear, it can lead to confusion, misinterpretation, resulting in errors and poor decisions. And if you find yourself dealing with ambiguous data or data with ambiguous meaning, you are likely to spend a lot of effort in mapping that data to the formats and structures that your IT systems expect. And this is all time consuming and costly. So it's a major barrier if there's no semantic interoperability or little to data sharing and therefore to the realization of the general, digital single market strategy in Europe. Of course, you can always fall back to the option of traditional methods, namely just asking for help at the data provider's side. But we want, of course, to move forward in the digital age. Now, a side note, semantic interoperability is clearly important, but it's also difficult to achieve in my and many other people's experience. And we must always remember that there's also a lot of factors that affect the level of difficulty. And these factors are often beyond our control, even the data space authorities' control. This interoperability framework, this European interoperability framework, is a nice reminder of that. You can see the semantic interoperability layer, but there's the interplay between these layers. The semantics of the information in your organization, they are decided for the most part by your organizational processes. In other words, what markets your organization is active in, the products and services they provide. In short, the organizational domain of interest. And in turn, the organizational context is for a large part shaped by the legal context, the upper layer in this picture. These are the rules and regulations that your organization needs to adhere to if your organization operates in this certain legal context or jurisdiction. And this in turn also affects the relevant meaning, the relevant concepts and terms in your information flow. So in short, for semantic interoperability to be a feasible goal, it helps if you are, as data space participants, active in comparable domains and share a legal context. It makes sense if we look to the common European data spaces announced in the EU strategy for data, that it contains already 9, it might be more by now, 9 data spaces for different economic sectors. And I expect also on the national levels and subsectors, there will be also different data spaces smaller ones, ecosystems arising because of those shared contexts that enables semantic interoperability levels. So summing up this first section, semantic interoperability, while a hard challenge, is beneficial in multiple ways. From a technical viewpoint, it enables clear understanding and interpretation of the data, and so it permits to quickly connect with other data space participants. And from a more business perspective, data can only be called a product by then if it can stand alone and be reused in different contexts through the added knowledge of semantic annotation. It also leads to reduced innovation lead times, because it's much clearer how a certain data set relates to questions people on the business side are trying to answer. Moving on from this introduction, a closer look to the role that vocabularies play in data spaces. Back to this picture. There's another picture that shows an overview that I think is nice, and that's this one. It mostly shows the same things as the one before, but it includes a note at the bottom right named vocabulary to signify its importance for the working of the system as a whole, for the interoperability, in particular the semantic interoperability. Now, I've been using the word vocabularies for a few minutes now, and I want to emphasize that I use it in a broad and inclusive sense. So I'm to make no distinctions between ontologies, like any type of consider vocabulary for this purpose. And if you look at the IDS architecture, you can see. Model. Oh, there was some problem with sound. I hope that's I had some echo. I hope that's fixed now. You can see the IDS information model listed as the first. This is the basic vocabulary, the common domain denominator for IDS data spaces. But there's also the domain-specific vocabularies. The IDS information model and the IDS reference architecture as well are domain agnostic. They do not make any assumptions about what kind of domain participants are active in. So to clarify domain-specific data, to clarify the meaning of that data, you need domain-specific vocabularies. Energy data needs energy vocabularies, manufacturing data need manufacturing vocabularies, etc. And there's a third type or a role for vocabularies, and that is in clarifying usage policies in a machine and readable way. This is very important and interesting and challenging field, but it's out of scope for this talk. I'm focusing on the second type here. So moving back to the picture, basically what I've showed is that apart from the IDS information model, the central vocabulary that all parties of any IDS share, you have the domain vocabularies that clarify the actual meaning of data exchanged, and the vocabularies for usage policies at the right. Now, I have said now a few times that the IDS information model is, the basic vocabulary. That's not to say that it's immutable or can't be extended. In specific ecosystems, you can make domain-specific adaptations of that model, also called application profiles. So that too you can extend. But in specific domains, like I said, more and more expressive terms are needed for domain-specific meaning. And it is therefore a good practice to extend this basic information model with additional domain vocabularies, as seen in the middle, and provide them in the same way. So for that, a certain service is needed to provide a platform to host and maintain, publish, document these additional domain vocabularies. And this service in IDS is called the IDS Vocabulary Hub. So let's have a closer look. Because we have arrived at a particular component of the IDS reference architecture, the Vocabulary Hub. Situated here, the IDS Vocabulary Hub is where vocabulary users, database participants, and vocabulary providers meet and work together towards semantic interoperability, which is, by the way, a continuous effort, never finished. Before I go into these two lists, it's important to note that this work happens design time, not during runtime. This is an important distinction. Semantic interoperability is mostly achieved by implementing vocabularies during the setup phase or design time, the configuration of the connector, not during runtime where the actual data sharing happens. So it's a preparation, so to speak. Now, in the Vocabulary Hub, it's where vocabulary providers and vocabulary users meet. So the vocabulary providers in particular can use this tool, this component, to offer common or standardized domain vocabularies to be reused, and even some implementation support, like very good documentation or validation artifacts, schemas, but also as a platform for open standardization, so gathering feedback from users to further improve and organize further maintenance and development of these standard vocabularies. And even go as far as to offer other semantic method management data services that boost vocabulary use and boost interoperability, such as facilitating the creation of mappings. From the other perspective, the vocabulary users, they come to these vocabulary hubs to learn about the available vocabularies and how to use them, to make them their own, or to make extensions that fit their use case. So to edit or build upon them, on these standardized vocabularies, and to publish those customized vocabularies for reuse by others. So participating is also contributing. One of the recent changes to the IDS Reference Architecture Model describes this process. Let's have a closer look. Here's the recent addition, the role of the Vocabulary Hub during the data offering setup phase. You can see two swim lanes. Now, don't worry, I know this is small text. We'll zoom in a minute. But you can see here a process starting from the bottom left with two swim lanes, the upper one being the Vocabulary Hub and the lower one the data provider side. The data provider sets out to create a new data offering. And as usual, for that, they create a self-description using the IDS information model as a basis, but hopefully also including reference to common domain vocabularies to describe the semantics of the data, the payload. And if they don't, well, be careful, like we said, not using vocabularies leads to this at the customer or consumer side, the poor data consumers. We could have saved them that much time by telling them more about what data this is. So hopefully many data providers opt for using domain vocabularies in this step and add the vocabulary to the self-description. Otherwise, as a next step, the decision comes to publish that vocabulary or not. Again, the happy flow here would be publishing the vocabulary to the Vocabulary Hub. Otherwise, no reuse is possible, and we're still far along from using common terms from the data provider's perspective. So that's where the bridge to the Vocabulary Hub is. The data provider publishes these custom vocabulary hopefully with as much reuse of common vocabularies as possible. And the vocabulary hub receives this vocabulary and does some further processing like validation, quality checks, creating persistent links to these vocabularies, ensuring persistent availability, and publishing them in the registry, including some documentation. This information, more information on this can be found on the light gray, following the light gray link below. This is basically a chapter 3 in the IDS run that has been extended with this information. So the challenge for Vocabulary Hub tooling is to make this flow as easy and powerful as possible. Summing up this part, the IDS Vocabulary Hub is a component, a platform to host, maintain, publish, and document domain vocabularies required to achieve semantic interoperability. For the most part, the functionality is during the preparation phase, the design time, the implementing or offering data resources. And looking at the main users, for the vocabulary providers, it provides the opportunity to maximize reuse of their vocabularies. And for vocabulary users, it should be a way, or it should be empowering them to correctly and completely describe their data assets and maximize the value and the interest of possible data consumers. I am looking very much forward to the coming years and to see the different kinds of implementations of this component. And when looking forward, I see a few interesting innovation challenges to better serve data space participants. I'd like to share 3 here in the form of 3 questions. I think in practice, what we need to address is how can we boost vocabulary use by participants, in particular vocabulary reuse. So this aligns to the first step in the swim lane from before, because we see that it's about increasing ease of use, showing that the effort pays off, because it does take effort, and giving support for these parties. Secondly, I think we have to provide participants ways to connect data to semantic web ontologies that doesn't require them to work with knowledge graph from now on or become ontology experts. So how do we harness the power of linked data without introducing too much unfamiliar technology, without needlessly increasing the barrier to entry, without higher complexity? I think this trade-off is also an interesting direction. And finally, maybe the wild card here, it's clear that products that have been making the news for a while, like GPT-4, are very powerful. And to me, they represent unexplored territory. And my question is, could large language models function as translators between common vocabularies and data participants' data sets, or their semantic dialect, if you will? So a very brief demonstration to make this rather general talk about IDS, about the IDS Vocabulary Hub, and maybe more specific by means of an example. As I said, TNO has developed a IDS Vocabulary Hub implementation called Semantic Treehouse. It implements this concept and has been designed for mostly vocabulary providers in mind. It's one platform for the publication, but also the collaborative maintenance and development of vocabularies, and includes data validation services and other ways of supporting implementations by vocabulary users. Some background. It's made with open standards for open standards. We also provided, we'll also go open source before the end of this quarter of this year. Oh, that's the wrong year. Sorry, that should be this year, of course, not 2022. And currently, Tino is hosting 10 of these semantic Treehouse environments, attracting around 1,000 unique monthly visitors over those 10 environments. So as I'll show in a minute, one of the most important functional groups is the publication side. The goal here is, of course, to provide clarity to users about the available vocabularies and their contents. You'll see its functions in the browser. And it's this tree view that keeps the user from being overwhelmed by too much complexity. I'll skip this and just move to the demo shortly. What I'll also show is how the community involvement has been taken form in Semantic Treehouse. You'll see, the possibility for users to track issues on vocabularies, to make change requests, to provide comments on change requests, to view usage notes, and to view active working groups and related documentation of those activities. And finally, the validation side. This serves the purpose to help users answer the question, well, have I implemented this vocabulary correctly? How can I test this? So the validation service supports multiple syntaxes like XML, JSON, CSV even, also RDF, familiar web languages, and checks for well-formedness, the adherence to schemas, but also more extensive business rules. And with this output, the extensive validation reports, users are informed of any problems and are assisted that way in any troubleshooting if need be. So I will now switch to a live environment. Please hold on while I do so. And the environment, the live environment I'll show is the one from an early data space called the Smart Connected Supplier Network. I think users will benefit from zooming in a little bit here, so, or attendees here, I mean. So allow me to zoom in here. What we see is the landing page of the vocabulary hub of the Smart Connected Supplier Network community. You can see we can go to the shared languages page and see these message specifications that this community has created collaboratively. These are all message models that we can look into. For example, the forecast model. Of course, this community is about manufacturing and supplying chains. So a forecast message is one of the vocabularies here. And already before viewing the contents, you can see there's all kinds of validation artifacts provided here. In this case, mostly in XML. But more on the validation later. Going to the forecast model, this is the tree view I was talking about. Not everything all at once, but starting from the top. At the left, you see the hierarchy of the information models, and in the middle and right, you see the more in-depth information of the selected element. If we would like to have a look at the semantics of the forecast issue date, we can by clicking on that, seeing the definition. But also maybe some example data. Going to the buyer customer party, looking at some example data here. And of course, facilitating further development and improvement of these models, the change request, the collaborative aspect is integrated here as well. Users can feedback any problems or issues that they have here with particular components. And there's also room for some Q&A. So what we have here is actually building a community knowledge base. There's also another perspective on this knowledge base, which is focusing on the change requests. And here you can see change requests by all the users, issues being tracked with explicit information on who the submitter is, but also what part of the vocabulary it addresses, thereby keeping that knowledge intact of what this was about. Following that link, we see it's about the order response message in and the order line element. Finally, for this brief demo, I would like to show the validation service. What we mean by that, this is for the implementation phase. Users, for example, adopting the vocabulary for the order or forecast, select those here and copy their own test message or test data from their implementation in this field. I can pre-select one here and run the validation with or without the extra business rules, if that's appropriate for this particular use case. Maybe an earlier version, depending on if there are other versions of interest, and validate. But now this, for example, of course, has been taken care of. So here there are no problems. If we change anything here or break anything here, the report will show and give feedback the nature of the problem. Like I said, this Semantic Treehouse is going open source before the end of this quarter. It's in continuous development, and we look very much forward in hearing any feedback in bringing this further to lower the threshold for both vocabulary providers and vocabulary users in collaborating and participating in the work on achieving semantic interoperability. That concludes the demo. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wouter, for the fantastic presentation and also the demo of Semantic Treehouse. Well, frankly saying, I really like that a lot, and I had the chance to promote it within a couple of projects, because this is really important for the projects which are looking forward to work collaboratively to build vocabularies around for the project activities. So like the GitHub for vocabulary. So this is great. And
Exactly, yeah.
so do you have questions? Do you have access to the questions list, or should we go one by one?
Might have access, but I must confess some unfamiliarity with the GoToMeeting platform.
Okay, so I can ease your usability here. So I will go one by one in the written questions, and I can also type the answer to the list. So the first one comes from Eric Sampson saying, do you have a clean definition of semantic interoperability?
Well, I couldn't talk about semantic interoperability without clarifying the meaning of that word. Then again, the paradox here is, of course, that there's different meanings here. Basically, when talking about semantic interoperability, like I said, I'm talking about the ability of IT systems that have not been designed to work together to exchange data with unambiguous and shared meaning. From a solution perspective, semantic interoperability means there are common data models in place on both sides, both the receiving and the sending end. Implemented vocabulary so that there's no ambiguity left, or it's clear, at least explicit, what the data in question represents. Now, I do admit that semantic interoperability and the challenges that come with that differ wildly depending on the context. Not just depending on the domain, but also depending on if you're active in the scientific field, dealing with big data, or dealing with business, e-data interchange. That's all different challenges.
Perfect. So I will go with the second one. About by Yorgos Sideras, about vocabulary, you mentioned that we usually use them in connector settings, but couldn't they also be used in sharing archives, for example, to have a vocabulary that would extend the sharing policies?
The latter part, vocabulary that would
extend the sharing policies.
Yeah, that reminds me. So I'm not sure if I understand the question, but that reminds me of a distinction I was trying to make before. So excuse me while I go back a little, which was this one. So vocabularies play a lot. Oh, excuse me, this is the wrong one. Vocabularies play a lot of roles, of course. They're indispensable in a lot of ways for data spaces, and that's not just semantically and annotating data that's being shared. It's also a vital part of making the usage policies clear, like I tried to visualize here. Without clear legal terms in a machine readable way, we cannot realize this vision of having trust and confidence that any data being shared is done so in a responsible and agreed upon way with the limits defined in the users policies. You could also argue that these lines are incomplete, right? You can draw a line from the vocabulary to the identity provider, because we need a common vocabulary to even talk about identity. The same goes for the broker and other parts. I guess the IDS information model deals with that. But if I understand the question correctly, then yes, it is certainly an important part of the answer to the question: how do we design machine readable usage policies?
Perfect. So I'm trying my best to take the notes and keep them written. So the other one comes from Lucy Kirstein. It would be helpful to go through the steps using real life examples. I think this comment was when you were presenting the steps in the presentation.
Yeah. Okay, so that would be the swim lanes, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I almost started touching upon real life example by going through the live vocabulary hub environment for a smart connected supplier network. That might be an appropriate context to use here. For example, some data provider has data about forecasts that need to be used to, or that can be shared to other participants in the network. It really requires for them to create this offering by means of a self-description in the first place, and then for the proper use and value of the data, to use standards in how this data is serialized and presented. like the standard I showed in the browser just now. I guess these steps are a little different than what's shown here, because what was shown in the Smart Connect Supplier Network community is a very tight community where the starting point is not the data, but the starting point is the standards, the vocabularies, and implementing those, and then creating these APIs and self-descriptions. One of the things I would like to see in the coming time. Yeah, sorry, Anil.
Sorry for the interruption. I think now we see the wrong screen. We had some comments about it. We see the demonstration of Semantic Treehouse. So maybe you can switch to PowerPoint.
Oh, is that so? I was not aware. I'm confused. Let's see. Sharing. Oh, it's still paused. My apologies. Oh. That's embarrassing. Okay, so I was already moving on for a while now. My apologies. I will now reopen the slide here. And if all works well, Anil, then the slide should be back in screen, correct?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Looking at the time, I'm tempted to give to answer this question by actually going through an example here. So let's do that. So back to the BD for Energy vocabulary hub. Now, what would creating a self-description using vocabularies what could that look like? So going to the vocabularies here, we see all kinds of common vocabularies listed here at the top. We see, for anyone involved in the energy domain, we see SAREF, SSN. We also see the smart data models. And I've given a demo before, which I think addresses the question from the attendee here, where I've shown how this vocabulary hub enables the process in the PowerPoint presentation from IDS here, creating the self-description using vocabularies. And I'll show you what I mean. In this case, the data in question was a simple time series, just a tabular data, lines of timestamps with energy use of some device. What I did was start with the vocabularies in this vocabulary hub. Bear in mind, this is an earlier version, but you can see the important ontologies for SAREF and a extension on SAREF from the Interconnect project. And we said we have a time series data set. So we start with the time series class or the time series term from this vocabulary. That's what we did. Now these vocabularies are formal OWL ontologies. So that means that reusing that's not always easy, because these vocabularies are very extensive. They provide a lot of different distinctions, different terms, classes, properties. So what we're trying to achieve here is enabling users to use these ontologies, to use these vocabularies, but only the parts that they need for their use case. And in this case, the use case was providing a self-description of a simple time series. So we took this time series, and the vocabulary hub here provides all these terms and properties out of this standard vocabulary. But we don't need everything. We just need the time series with data points. So we added those. And subsequently, although a data point can have many different properties according to the standard vocabulary, we only said for this use case, we need just the timestamp value and the unit of measure. When this is fit for purpose, and we're done here, because this use case was quite simple, at least the dataset was, the user is helped in step 3 of this sequence by providing customized schema files in the language, web language of their choice, be that XML, JSON, or triples, or even an OpenAPI specification that is built on the choices the user made here. So what we have here is a schema or an OpenAPI specification built on and therefore conformant to these standard vocabularies that we started with. So we can use these artifacts to start sharing data in a way that's in line and aligned with standard vocabulary. That's semantic interoperability. Now, like I said in the slide, creating such an offering, okay, it has a few other steps if you want to do that in IDS. One of the important steps in the flow is publishing that vocabulary, even though you mostly reused common vocabulary standards. Publishing your own for your use case is also a step here. And this is also facilitated in this particular implementation of the vocabulary hub, because now the result is among the list of vocabularies in the vocabulary hub. We have these standards at the top, but also room for user-specific vocabularies here. So others can view this message model and see, oh, sorry, this is not the right viewing mode. This is the viewing mode. What is this data about? It is a time series. It has a data point, and we can look at the extra semantic information for each of these parts, and even start building together or asking questions, further improving vocabulary. So I hope this long answer helped in clarifying this question. Thank you, Anil.
Thank you, Wouter. So we have 9 more questions to go, and the raised hand by Javier. So in order to be fair and apply the first come first reserve rule, so I will go with 1 more question and then give the word to Javier. Do you think vocabularies are enough to enable semantic interoperability? So a question by Eric Sampson.
Interesting question. I think I'm often reminded by a saying, systems not talking represent people not talking. And to me, that means that vocabularies are the result of people working together, at least to some extent, to find a common language. Like I said, in the earlier phase of this presentation, you need some sense of shared. You need some shared context in legal and domain sense because otherwise you are living in different worlds, basically, right? So how could you use the same language if you live in different worlds? So semantic interoperability is a lot about moving to share a common world, basically. This is a very abstract way of saying no, vocabularies are a technical artifact and are often a result of parties working together in achieving a shared understanding. And it's exactly this process that is continuous, challenging, and in need of assistance, and technology can play a role there. This is what we have seen in our work in the last 15 years, facilitating semantic interoperability in Dutch economic sectors. It's definitely work where you need to manage and involve a community to be open, to ensure that these technical artifacts, these vocabularies, become and remain fit for their purpose. Just slapping some kind of vocabulary in a website and saying, here you go, please use this, that's of course naive. There's a lot of work between partners involved or parties involved that's behind that. I hope that answers the question.
Perfect. Now I would like to give the word to Javier Esteve, who has his hand raised for a while. Javier, could you please unmute yourself? Okay, so if it's not the case, then we can go with the next. So the next question is, assume you have two datasets which are not standardized by vocabulary. Do you have a showcase where you use them in a process and receive bad quality, and then you map them on a vocabulary and repeat the process and have a much better quality?
I don't have. I'm not in a position now to provide a showcase of that. Although I am, the scenario described sounds very familiar. I think we can improve these processes a lot by distinguishing levels of maturity of vocabulary use. We don't all have to go. We don't all have to go implement our ontologies, although they are powerful. Data that is documented in a human readable way is already one step further and closer to semantic interoperability, right? Data that has at least some kind of machine readable vocabulary is also another step forward. The real benefit still comes when you start linking to other common vocabularies, common in the sense that others are more likely to be already familiar with these terms. But I think we would benefit if vocabulary hubs would give this sequential or stepwise experience or tooling where participants from any kind, small and medium enterprises, big corporations, can start at the data and the level they are and start building more semantics into their data offerings step by step.
Sorry, Anil, can you hear me now?
Yes, Javier, please go ahead.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself before, and I have no access to the questions, but someone has passed the questions for me. In any case, if I may, I would ask a question, just a question now, which is, I'm working for the Commission. This is not Javier, this is Enrique Staromieski speaking through Javier's link. And I was saying, we are working for the European Commission, and I was wondering to what extent your product or your services are aligned to the European Commission's, and more concretely to the CMIX standards. I'm thinking of the DCAT specification and ADMS specification, LDS specifications, etc. And to what extent it would be possible to export, import the content of the vocabulary have with these vocabularies. Yes, thank you.
Yes, I understand the question. Maybe addressing the question in two parts. The first is about the vocabulary hub as it is, as a general or abstract component described in the architecture of IDS. IDS fully supports DKIT IP and other and these other standards. In particular in their information model, so there are no conflicts there. If your question is about the specific tool that I demonstrated, then I would like to emphasize that this is made with open standards for open standards. DKIT AP is a very important one at that. The current functionality of this tool does not yet allow exports in DKIT AP, but this is definitely something that is on our roadmap. Does that answer your question, Javier? Oh, sorry, I forgot. This is not actually.
Hendrik, yes, absolutely, yes, thank you.
Okay.
Perfect. I think we are about to finish, but very briefly, one more question maybe we can take. What mapping capabilities do you have in Treehouse? And so I can maybe combine this one with another one. What is the current status of automatic mapping of non-standardized data to a certain vocabulary?
Oh, that's that latter part. That makes me smile. That's the dream, right? Automatic mapping of data sets to common vocabularies. That's the dream. And while dreaming, I can't help but think or wonder what the opportunities of these new generation large language models could provide. If anyone has been is working on that, please reach out. Regarding the first question, mappings is we identified as a very common challenge that the vocabulary hub could assist in. It's also a complicated task. For now, the mapping functionality in Semantic Treehouse is there is a mapping functionality. Vocabulary the managers of vocabulary of the vocabulary hub of the Semantic Treehouse can show how to vocabularies or how to message models relate. Literally by keeping them side by side, annotating their relations of the different elements. So basically having two of these hierarchies next to each other and information on the relation of each element pair. Looking at the time, that would be for another session.
Yeah, as said, it's always great to conclude the day with a dream or thinking about future. So it was perfect timing in my opinion. So thank you very much for all participants for your time, and thank you so much, really, Wouter, for a great presentation and the answers provided to the questions. And
it was my pleasure.
Yeah, we are really looking forward to some sequel of this kind of webinar, I guess.
Will do.
Yeah, let's do it.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.